There is no greater time in human history as a Christian to be alive than now. The question is, how are you going to choose to live? Did you know, guys, that telling the world about what is coming is a biblical mandate that's given to you? Did you know that? Did you know that the Bible actually commands you to go out and to speak to people concerning these things? And it's amazing to me how so many people have ignored that command, right? They look at this parable and they make it a lesson about money. They look at this parable and they make it a lesson about investing. Now, don't get me wrong. You can take some very important principles out of this parable and you can apply it to things like money and investing and so on and so forth. But the parable itself did not have anything to do with that and never had the intent of communicating those principles. This parable speaks of something completely different. And that might come to a shock to some people because most people have never heard this teaching or have never heard the discussion of this parable within the context of the one in which we're about to communicate. But understand this, and it's important, right? The surrounding context is signs of the second coming, signs of God's impending judgment. And the context here has not changed. Jesus is still talking. This is still the same conversation. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country who called his servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, and unto another 2, and to another 1, and to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. And he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made them other 5 talents." I'm going to stop really quickly before I talk about what these guys actually did with what was given to them. First of all, for those of you that don't know the implication of the term talent here, talent does not refer to like the word talent in a talent show, right? Talent here is a term of measurement in that day, right? It spoke of a certain weight of a particular precious metal, right? So when he went to them and he gave them a talent, the idea here is that he gave them a certain weight of gold or a certain weight of silver to invest, right? So this is some kind of a form of money, right? So he gave one of them a certain weight of either gold or silver. He did the same thing for another, and he did the same for another. And I think this is a very important fact here, because the first implication that we draw from this, and it's on its face, and it's very, very easy to understand, is this master, before he goes away on his long trip, he gave to these men a very distinct and unique amount of money. Each of them got a certain level of money according to what he knew was their ability to be able to manage it, right? And I think that that's a very important picture, right? Because you've got to understand sort of the idea behind what's happening here. And look, as an employer and as somebody who oversees, has a lot of responsibility and has spent a lot of time as a businessman over the years, this is an important principle to grasp, right? When you have people that work for you, you never ever seek to give them more than the capacity that they have been able to demonstrate to be able to take care of. Now, the trick about this is you have to be able to recognize their capacity, and you also have to be able to recognize their future potential, right? Because you never want to limit somebody that works for you to the current capacity in which they have, but at the same time, you also don't want to set them up for failure by giving them more than what their capacity allows them to be able to control, right? So what you have to learn to do is you have to learn to give them enough of a certain responsibility that allows them to be pushed just a little bit, that will expand their learning horizon, right? And this is a very important thing. By the way, we do this with our children. If you're a good parent, you'll do this with your children. If you're any good at leading anybody, you will always do this. You will learn, you will pray for, you will ask God to give you discernment in understanding the people that you are in charge of, the people that you are supposed to contribute to and help and have by your side, and you will always figure out ways to challenge them to the next level, and you will go out of your way to give them what you know their capacity has demonstrated the ability to be able to do. So this is what he does. He naturally finds the person with the greatest capacity, and he gives them the greatest amount of money and trusts them in order to be able to deliver. So, verse 17, likewise, he that had received two, he also gained the other two. But he that received one went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. Now, this is very interesting because I just want to simply say this, and I do think it's important. It's not a coincidence that this master recognized the diminished capacity of the person that he only gave one to, because he had a sense in him that that person would not be capable of duplicating that amount or increasing the amount. He also had a feeling that that person may not have been faithful with that money. So what did he do? He gave the least amount of money. He wasn't going to give the 5 talents to the guy that was going to end up burying it, right? He gave 1 talent to that person. And I think it's really funny how this works, because God does the same thing with us. God recognizes our capacity, and that he gives us that which he knows we are capable of being able to function within those means, and then continues to push upon us even more. By the way, I want people to understand this, okay? Because this is very important. There is a lie that continues to get communicated amongst Christians that not one word of it is actually biblical. And here's the lie. Many of you have heard it. Many of you have at times said it, and you've embraced it. And this is the lie that gets communicated. And I do call this a lie. The lie sounds something like this: God will never give you more than what you can handle. How many of you have heard that? God will never give you more than what you can handle. Do you know that they base that lie on a passage in Corinthians that actually says something very similar to that? What those words actually mean in Corinthians is that God will never put you in a position where you cannot resist evil, where you cannot say no to sin. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about circumstances, and it's not talking about you being given something that you can't handle. So understand the biblical principle here. The biblical principle has nothing to do with the fact that God will never give you more than what you can handle, right? I guarantee you that when that person was given 5 talents, or when that person was given 2, or even when that person was given 1, they probably were presented with a very challenging situation that was beyond their capacity to be able to handle completely. Why? Because they were being challenged, right? They were being given something with an expectation that they should be able to do more. But the problem here is that the issue is not emphasizing whether or not they met the ability of their requisite capacity. That's not the issue here. The communication is not that. The communication is they were given something very valuable with an expectation to be fruitful with it, and they did, with the exception of one person, and that one person is going to be condemned as a result of not doing it. Now, the thing here, and the very important picture that we draw from this, is the information that God has given us regarding the time that is to come is the proverbial talent that God has put in our hands. He's told us, you've been armed with the information, right? I might be considered a person who has the 5 talents. And the reason why I would be considered that person is because God's given me an ability to understand the Bible languages. He's given me a more, aggressive ability or prowess to be able to communicate, right? The tools that I have with respect to linguistics might be a lot more advanced than many others, and he's given me a much larger platform, right? So if he's given me all of these tools, and I take these tools and I use them to benefit myself, or I use them to communicate a message that God never intended for me to communicate, well then guess what? There's a condemnation for me, and the Bible's going to talk about that condemnation, right? But if I take what God's given me and I seek to multiply it by blessing his name with everything that I've been entrusted with, by telling people about the message of his return, things change, right? And they change radically. Kind of interesting when you think about it. Look at what it goes on to say here. This is very interesting. After a long time, verse 19, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. By the way, it's interesting how Jesus is saying after a long time. It would appear as though in the parable, Jesus is telling his disciples at this moment that it might be a lot longer than they think that he would actually return, right? I think he's implying that here. I don't think that message is as relevant today, in that we are way more closer to the second coming of Christ than they were, right? I mean, I think that's kind of an important thing here. But look what happens. So it says in verse 20, and so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. That's pretty heavy, right? This man took this massive responsibility that God had given him, and he was fruitful with that responsibility. He took the rich resources that God had put in front of him, and he did not squander them. He took them and he used them in order to further the kingdom. I think it's very interesting, by the way, and a very telling sign of what wickedness actually does. Wicked men, when entrusted with tremendous resources, oftentimes squander those resources to nothing, because they have characteristics that oftentimes encourage the destruction of that which is good. So he that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. By the way, it's really interesting, and you should probably do this. It's a lot of fun to do this. Take verse 23 in your Bible, circle the word 23, and then draw a line that connects it to 21, and circle 21. And what you'll notice is you could write a little note there that says, the rewards are the same. Think about that for a second, right? In other words, the person who was faithful with the 5 talents and produced another 5 was blessed the same way that the person who had 2 talents and multiplied those 2. They were both praised by God, and the exact same terminology was used to praise them. Why is that the case? Because the expectation here is that God wants you to take whatever resources you have and use them for his glory. Some people are given less resources than others. Some people have a smaller audience to talk to. Some people have less of a visible role. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that God gives you, the expectation is he wants you to be faithful with it, right? Look what it goes on to say. It's very interesting. Verse 24. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawn. And I was afraid and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there hast, that is thine. So look at what the guy that took the 1 talent and did nothing with it. He took it and he buried it. But look at the statements that he makes to the master. He says, Master, I took the 1 talent and I buried it, and I knew thee that what? That thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawn. What he's doing is this. He's creating an excuse for his laziness. He's making an excuse for why he chose not to take the resources that was given to him and to move on. Look what it goes on to say. This is interesting, because the response of the master is perhaps way more significant than the words that this guy said. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. It's interesting, because the idea here is that the master, should be condemned for reaping where he did not sow, or gathering in places that he did not actually prepare for gathering. Yet it's so funny when you think about this. Wise and prudent men and women will always look for opportunities to reap in places where they have not sown, and to gather where they have not strawed. Because the idea behind it is there are so many areas where people have sown into something and have neglected the opportunity to walk back and to sow or to reap from the result of that sowing. It's amazing to me how many people have made investments in certain areas and walked away from those investments only to allow things to be completely neglected, right? When somebody who has a viable understanding of the opportunity that neglect actually creates and can make a beautiful living from it, right? How many times has God created an opportunity for you to take advantage of that we've just completely ignored for whatever reason? Fear that we had in our heart, whatever it might be. What the master says is brilliant here. What the master says is very correct. He called him a wicked servant. He says, verse 27, thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine with usury. It's very heavy. He says, you know this is what I do. You watch me. You see me take advantage of these opportunities. What you should have at least done is taken that little resource that you buried, and you should have given it to a banker to earn you a little bit of interest so that I could take that little bit and bring it back. People ask me all the time, well, how does this apply to the message of the gospel? Or how does this, and by the way, we're not talking about, just so that you guys know, we're not talking about the message of the gospel here when it comes to the parable of the talents. Did you know that? We're talking about the message of the end times, right? It's not an evangelical message in and of itself. It's a message about the time to come. And it's funny because what this guy is saying is he's making every excuse in the book for why he would not do what he was obligated to do. He made every excuse in the book, all of which were wrong, and all of them stemmed from laziness and ungodliness. That's what the master told him. Those things stemmed from those two characteristics. He had the mindset of the poor. He developed the heart of the poverty. That's the very core of it. It was in his mind. And the guy told him, even if you felt like you couldn't produce the kind of gain that these other people produced, you should have at least taken it and give it to somebody else who could have. Look what he goes on to say. Take therefore the talent from him and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. By the way, it's interesting when it talks about giving it to the one that has 10 talents. I don't know if the implication here is give it to him to manage or give it to him to have personally. I don't really know. Either way, they're both a benefit, right? So give it to him that hath the 10 talents, for unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast you the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? Because what Jesus is telling us is that person who chose not to take the message, the very important and powerful message, was a wicked person, right? Was a person who diminished it. Jesus using the terminology here, burying the talent, there's a reason why he uses that term. The people that are seeking to take the message of righteousness and bury it are the slothful and evil people that continue to carry by their side a message of death and a message of destruction. God is telling us a very clear message. He's saying, don't be that person. You've been entrusted with valuable information. You've been told about what to expect in the last day. You've been given all the signs to look for. You've been given every condition necessary to be able to understand what's happening. Go out there and make the investment and multiply it, right? Let people know. Tell them what's going on. It's critical, it's important. Let me make one more statement. Every one of those men that chose to do what God had asked them to do and invested and chose to multiply that which had been entrusted to them, all reaped great benefits. They all reaped rewards that were far beyond their capacity to be able to produce for themselves. They all were blessed in ways they never thought they could ever be blessed. And the question that I would throw at you today would be this: are you willing to open yourself up to temporary displeasure and difficulty in order to obtain a prize that you could never imagine having obtained? Is it worthwhile for you to make the investment now to be able to reap the reward later? I hope it is. Because I can tell you this, God has great things in store for us. Let's do it his way.